dear friend Alice. Would you tell us a little bit about your early life, where
yes,
you were?
yes, Oprah Gail King, that you are.
Yes,
Oh,
Oprah.
what do I need to?
Oh, that'd be better.
Okay,
Thank
all
you.
right, okay. Technology is not my friend. Can you hear me? I didn't go to school for technology. First of all, thank you, Judy, for inviting me to share. I have 77 years worth of life, and I'm going to try to respond as succinctly as I can to your questions. Okay. I grew up in Chicago, Illinois. In a very segregated city at that point. And poor, single parent who was committed, to the fact that her children would have an education that would allow them to live a fuller life than she was able. And so she often worked 2 jobs. But we went to Catholic schools. I went to 12 years of Catholic schooling. And in elementary school, it was the Sisters of Mercy, who had very little mercy. But they gave me a good foundation, despite all of my resistance to receiving that. Well, I really wasn't. I was a very compliant child because I really saw how hard my mother was working and working 2 jobs, and I did not want to cause her any distress. And the song that the choir just sang reminded me so deeply of, as a little girl, feeling like I didn't belong, that I was not liked, I was not accepted, despite my mother constantly trying to build up my self-esteem, because there was a larger world saying that I did not belong, I was not accepted. Went on to Providence High School, which was a predominantly white high school. Now, the thing that really shaped this period is that my mother, committed to her 3 children having a good education, worked 2 jobs. We had very little money, and my brothers and I could not understand why she was spending money to send us to school, to private Catholic schools, when we could go to the public school. But her response was, "You won't get the education you need. So shut up." Well, she didn't. She would never say shut up. She would say, just do your work. Just do your work. And so that commitment has been a part of who I am, commitment to doing the best you can despite the circumstances. So I went on to high school, graduated, was declared an underachiever because I never did well in math. I was always very good in history and language and all of that, but was horrible in math. And I measured myself by math. So really never really appreciated how well I did in other subjects because I was so poor in math. So went on, graduated, went to Spelman. Spelman College is a historically black college in Atlanta, Georgia. I thought it was too much for my mother to pay, but my mother insisted that I go to this women's college because, again, she wanted me to have the best that she could give me. And at Spelman is where I've found my voice as an African American woman and as a learner. Because up to that point, I didn't see myself as a learner. I could do what I saw as being the easy stuff, reading and writing, but I couldn't do the arithmetic. So leaving Spelman, graduating, and finding out my brain did work, and ended up, I always had, because my mother worked so hard, well, I blame her. I always had these grand ideas. I'm going to change the world. And so some recruiters from Housing and Urban Development, the old HUD, some of you know that, they came to Spelman, and they hired me as a relocation advisor for HUD. Well, I was very excited because that sounded like a title, a really big title, and I'd be able to do really big things. Well, basically it meant reviewing paperwork. And after 8 months, I told my mother I couldn't stand it. I can't keep doing this. I'm not, it's not gonna, and she said, you have to have a job, Alice. And so then I'd met a number of people in my growing up, women who were social workers. And so one of those social workers told me I should go down and become a social worker. So I did that for 1.5 years until I realized that I was not making any difference there. Because when you're seeing 80 kids in a month, you're not making any difference. So I was frustrated. What do I do? And the one thing I thought I would never do was to teach. I really didn't value the teachers that I had had very much, so I wasn't going to teach. But I got an opportunity, and I still don't remember exactly how this happened, to be a part of a special program for people who did not have a teaching background. They hadn't gone to school for teaching. And I said, okay, I'll try this. I loved it. Something that I never thought I would be able to do. I loved. And that's how I spent the first 5-6 years. Well, 4 years, I spent it teaching 5th and 6th graders, like those little ones back there.
Oh.
5th and 6th graders social studies, which was my skill set. I learned. I was beginning to value the fact that I really did love history. I loved the social sciences. And the arithmetic, I really didn't have to count very much.
Wonderful. Well, and then you went on to study theology.
Yeah. I experienced a call to ministry, and I thought I was going to go for Christian education. And I had one of those mystical experiences, riding the L. If any of you know Chicago, there's the L station. And one day I'm riding along on the L, and it's pouring down rain, and I look out of the window, and there's this clearing, and I'm going, what's going on? And just heard the words, preach. Oh. And I went, huh? And then I looked around, who else is seeing this? Well, everybody else on the L train was just riding along. And I went, oh, okay. So then I went to the pastor, because at that point I'd become African Methodist Episcopal as a result of my first husband. And that's how I got out of the Catholic Church. And went to the pastor, and I said, I think I've been being called to preach. And he looked at me and said, no, you're not. Oh. ever since I was a little girl, I've had this kind of internal sense of what was right for me, that God and I had a relationship. And I just looked at him and said, well, I guess God will let you know. And I went on to seminary and did my MDiv, Master's of Divinity, and then went on to do a doctorate in pastoral psychology and counseling, because I really wanted to understand how people emotionally and spiritually put their lives together. And I thought that field would help me understand that. And I had this big idea that I was going to transform the African Methodist Episcopal Church as a result of my education. They were not waiting for me. But for 30 years, I had a practice in pastoral psychology and counseling where I had the opportunity to work with lots of different kinds of people from a lot of different backgrounds. And this world that we live in around race is so messed up, shall I say that. When I first went to Washington, D.C., that's where I went after I finished my doctorate and worked in pastoral counseling centers of Greater Washington for about 15 years. Their first question, their concern, they knew I had the background. I had the skills. I was a graduate of Northwestern, there's no question. But their first question was, well, where will we place you? Because we don't know if white people will use you. And there was one guy there who was directing one of their centers who said, I'll take her. And I ended up having the opportunity to work in Manassas, Virginia. And if you know Virginia, that was not a bastion of freedom and liberty and justice for all. But I worked with some wonderful people who allowed me to engage them in an exploration of their lives. And I learned a lot about white people in that experience, and learned a lot about myself and what it meant to be a minister to all people, not just to some people. So then, you're going to learn more about me than you wanted to know. My second husband and I opened up a pastoral counseling center and worked at that pastoral counseling center for 6 years, doing all kinds of stuff, working with Head Start programs, consulting in churches, trying to bring a message that we're all human beings. And we all have trauma. We all have flaws. We all have a need to grow beyond our raising. And so I did that, got burnt out, got an opportunity to move to North Carolina. In response, I have these questions I get asked. I was at a conference and I said to a colleague, a white colleague, and I said, what can a black woman do in North Carolina? He looked at me and said, absolutely nothing. So, because I'd always wanted to move to North Carolina for some reason. I don't know. It was just a place that I thought I was supposed to move to. And he called me a couple months later. He said, you still interested in coming to North Carolina? And I said, yeah, what's up? He said, well, we'd like to offer you a position. And so I was going to be the first African American on their staff. And then I also took a part-time position at Hood Theological Seminary, which morphed into a full-time position, and I taught at Hood for 10 years. And that's where the journey to Mississippi began. And a friend of mine, a Lutheran pastor, was assigned to the coast after Hurricane Katrina. And I said to her, what can I do to be helpful? She said, bring your students down.
Huh.
It did not occur to me that I was coming to Mississippi, though.
Oh.
And you know, my mind, me and God and, you know, the Lord and I, you know, He lets me know, she lets me know what she wants me to know so I can take the next step. And I don't get the whole picture. On the van, bringing 8 students down, I realized I was going to Mississippi. And I had a real meltdown. And I told my students, who were black and white, and I said, okay, we're going to Mississippi. We have to stay together. We don't go anywhere by ourselves. They thought I'd lost my mind. So we got to Mississippi. We stopped for lunch here on the coast, and we walked into the Mellow Yellow restaurant on the coast. Some of you know that. And the waitress said, asked one of the students, what were we doing? And she said, the student said, we've come to help you recover from Hurricane Katrina. She turns around and announces it to the restaurant, that's why we're there. And the restaurant applauds. It was a magical moment, a mystical moment, because at that point I knew I was okay and that my students would be okay. And so we spent a whole week learning how to do ministry in the midst of a communal disaster. And met Judy, met a lot of people during that time, and they weren't I grew up in Chicago, Emmett Till, you know, that story. But it wasn't the Mississippi that I had been hearing about. It was a very different place. And so went back to seminary, continued teaching, and one of my students said that to this day, I do not know or remember the student who said this to me. You're going back to Mississippi, Dr. Graham. I said, no. I mean, I know people. I go back there, and I like it there. He said, no, you're going to Mississippi. And he said it with such conviction that I had to pay attention. And I prayed about it. And I spent a whole summer in a process of discernment. And it got clearer and clearer to me that I was to move to Mississippi. Now, I was in my 60s, full professor. Okay, Lord, what in the world are you doing? And went to tell the president that this would be my last year teaching. And he looked at me and he said, well, do you have a job? Where are you going? I said, I don't know. I just know I'm going to Mississippi, and this will be my last year teaching. And he wouldn't accept my resignation. And I just said, okay, you don't have to, but I'm leaving. And he did finally accept it. And I still didn't have a job. And it was March. I didn't have a job. I was a teacher. You don't make a lot of money teaching. Didn't have much savings. Okay, God, all right, well, something's got to give. And so Roberta Avila, who is the previous director of Interfaith Disaster Task Force, she called me and said, I've decided to take another position. And would you be willing for the board to get your name and for the part-time position, and then you can figure out what else you're going to do. So I said, okay, I can do this. And then it was going to cost me an arm and a leg to move. And another friend I had made called and said, and I was talking to her, and she said, and I was telling her how much it was going to cost. She said, oh no, we've been talking about this. There's 7 of us are coming down to move you. So I said, okay, moving is taking, all I had to do was rent a truck. Well, that was quite a bit less than the cost of moving expenses. So I said, okay. Then another friend called and said, have you found a place to live yet? I said, no, I don't know what I'm going to do about that. Oh, my daughter has a house that she's about to renovate, and she says you can live in it rent-free until you find. So I moved. And got the full-time position at at that point it was Interfaith Disaster Task Force. And I'm really a very shy person. But I knew that to be effective at Interfaith Disaster Task Force, I was going to have to meet people because I had to raise funds because they didn't have any money. And I said, okay, teach me how to do this because this is not, I taught, but when you're teaching to a context, to a,
Mm-hmm.
But here I had to go out and speak and be, and even when you're preaching within a context. Well, I raised a lot of money for Interfaith Disaster Task Force, and decided it was time for me to leave. Really burnt out by all the fundraising. It was not my long suit. And then a friend said Back Bay Mission had an opening. And I said, oh no, I'm not doing another nonprofit. It's too stressful, the raising of money. And she said, this is the job for you, Alice. And I want you to pray about it. Or she's not a church woman. She says, whatever you do, do that. Because I think this is the job for you. And she was on the board at Back Bay Mission. And I prayed about it, and okay. And I found out about the UCC and found the work that Back Bay Mission was doing, and I said, okay, is this it? And I interviewed for it. And for the first time in my life, I was very clear that I was the one who was to do this work at Back Bay Mission. And they asked me, the last question they asked me in that interview was, why should we choose you? And it stopped me for a minute, because that's not my style to boast and say. For me, that's boasting. And I said, because I'm the best person for the job. And I went down the list of skills that I would bring. And I went, who is talking here? And they offered me the job. I got the job, and I stayed at Back Bay Mission for 6 years.
Wow.
I had agreed to stay for 5. I was going to stay for 3. They negotiated for 5. I stayed for 6.
Well, everything you've said sort of reinforces what I spoke of last week, and that was to align yourself with God. And if you do, with the flow of life, and you keep your intentions there, that you will know and you will be guided. It may be slow, and you may do it one step at a time, but you will always know, and you won't have to always worry about if you're going the right direction. But yeah. And I was going to ask you too, we have some young people, and we have a train coming too, first. We have some young people in the audience today, and I know that with the life that you led, and I know that you've been through a lot of challenges. You overcame them, and I know that your life's goal or mission was to make the world a better place, and we can certainly see that you've done that. Do you have any advice you'd give these young people?
Listen for your heart. Listen for your heart. Learn how your heart speaks to you. It's not going to be like how someone else's heart speaks to them. And you may make mistakes in your listening. But that's the process of learning your heart's voice. That's the process. Know that you are a unique individual. No one else was put on this earth to be you. You are the only one, and you have to learn and discover through the things that life throws at you who you are. The challenges that come are for your growth. The failures that you experience are for your growth. The successes you get to celebrate. But those failures are the ones that grow you. Learning who you are and how your heart speaks to you, from my experience, is the most critical aspect of growing up, of growing and aging into wisdom.
Wow. Wow. We have loved getting to know you better, and look forward to seeing you more and hearing more from you. And thank you so much for these words of wisdom. And we're going to make a clip of that, what you just said, and advertise that everywhere. Thank you so much, Dr. Alice Graham.